Good morning, everybody. I hope you're having a great morning so far and that you're ready to talk about fractions and decimals. So the objective today, I can identify and read decimal numbers. I'll know I'm successful if I can explain how decimals are related to fractions. So today is just an introduction with decimals and thinking about fractions as decimals. When we think about fractions, we know that they are smaller than one whole. Like if you were to have one whole pizza, a fraction would be less than one whole. A decimal is the same thing. And when I think about decimals, I always think back to money. Like if you have a $1 bill, that's a whole dollar, right? Um, Sometimes a whole dollar is worth more than others. But if you have a decimal amount, you're thinking about less than a dollar. So like 52 cents is a decimal amount. Just like 52 hundredths of a dollar is how much you have in money if you think of it as a fraction, because it takes 100 cents to make a dollar. All right, so what fraction is represented by each of these small squares? So we're reviewing a little bit from the geoboard. Each of these small squares, it's 1/16th, right? Because it takes 16 of these to make one whole. What about this? What fraction is represented in red? So this one is just all over the 1/2 of the geoboard, right? We could also think of this as being 8/16. What about in green here? We have 1/4 or 1/4. So 1/4 of the whole, 1/4 of the whole. It is also 4/16 of the whole. What about this? This is 1/8. Now, look at our two models here. How are they the same and how are they different? We've got the geoboard here. We have a mat here. How are they similar? They're both the same shape. They're both squares. How are they different besides just the colors? How many does this one have? How many little bitty pieces to make the whole? 16. How many does this one have to make a whole? It's 100. So we'll work with our base 10 pieces again while we're talking about decimals. So if we were thinking about fractions, and if we say that this is the whole, what fraction of the whole would be one strip? Think about how many of these it would take to cover a mat. It takes 10, right? So one of these would be 1/10. Now look at the little bitty units. How many of these would it take to cover the whole? Take 10 of them to cover a strip. It would take 100 of them to cover one mat. So we're going to think while we're working with decimals and our number pieces, our base 10 pieces, we're going to consider a mat to be one whole, kind of like $1, 1.00. We're going to think of these strips as being 1/10 of the whole. And as a fraction, notice here it looks like 1/10, 1/10. As a decimal, it looks like 10 cents would look, 0.1 or 0.10. And the hundredths are like pennies. One other thing to notice is that when you go to the right side of a decimal, you start adding this TH. The other words look the same except that you've got the TH. I always tell kids it's kind of like you're spitting when you go to the right side of the decimal and you have to say those place values. So on the left side of the decimal, we have ones, tens, hundreds, thousands, right? And then we've got the decimal on the right side, you have tenths, hundredths, and it would keep going. It would go to thousandths and 10,000ths, but you're adding that TH. So usually it does sound kind of like you're spitting when you're saying it. But when you're writing it, if you have to write the place value of something and you put 100 when it's supposed to be hundredth, that's completely different. Just like $100 is totally different than 1 penny. And hundredths are like a penny. 1 over 100 would be the fraction. 0.01 would be the decimal. So if that's the case, then what is the value of this collection? So every mat you see is one whole. So you've got one whole, two wholes. So we've got a 2. And then just to the right of the decimal, we have our tenths. 1, 2, 3, 4 tenths. So we've got 1 decimal, 4, and we have 3 hundredths. So 1.43 is what it looks like. 2.43, so sorry. So we've got 2 and 43 hundredths. The last name of your collection is going to be the value of the last place that you're looking at. So how we read this is how it looks, 2.43, but we read it with an and. Anytime you see a decimal, the word for that decimal is and. So if you say and when you're reading a number, you're really saying that there is a decimal. So I always tell kids when you've got, let's say you've got 1,344, you don't say the word and when you're saying that number unless there's a decimal. So this would be 2 and 43 hundredths. This 43, you read it just like if it were 43 just by itself, but then you have to put on the place value of the last digit here. So this decimal is like this is the same as how we would read a mixed number. 2 and 43 hundredths. This is 2 and 43 hundredths. So how do you think we would read this? 3 and 56, and the 6 is in the hundredths place, so 3 and 56 hundredths. Okay, try this one. Say it out loud. 7 and 42 hundredths. What's the value of this? We've got 2 of the strips. We know we're counting them as tenths, so we have 2 tenths. Are these numbers equivalent? Remember, equivalent means equal. Or are some greater than or less than others? So here we have 3 tenths. This is like 3 dimes. Here we have 30 hundredths. This is like 30 pennies. This is 3 tenths. This is 30 hundredths. They are all equivalent to each other. Any time you have a decimal, any zeros that are added to the end don't change the value. It changes how you'd read it, but not the value, not what it's worth. So today's assignment just kind of gets you started into decimals. It's not long. You've got a little reading to do with it. 4 tenths, 40 hundredths, or both. And then you have some speech bubbles here about what other kids have said when they're looking at it, what they think. A reminder on the base 10 pieces, this mat is one whole, which is 10 out of 10, 10 tenths, or 100 100ths. And also how to write it, if I can get that little box to go away. 1.0 is the same thing as 1.00. So look at that 1.00 as a dollar. That may help. Now look at the strip as 1/10 of your whole. 1/10 is the same thing as 10 hundredths. And we write that as 0.1 or 0.10. Then, and think of those as dimes. The 100th is one little bitty square unit, 1/100th, also 0.01, and that's like a penny. So you've got several slides here that are just asking you to explain what you know. Do your best. This was just your intro day. So just tell me what you're thinking so far, okay? Showing equivalency with addition equations. Use fractions, some addition equations to describe this set of base 10 pieces. You could say something like 1/10 plus 1/10 plus 1/10 plus 1/10 for addition. Using decimals, show me what 1/10 looks like. 1/10 plus 1/10 plus 1/10. It would be like if you're adding dimes. Same thing through these. Do your best. Send me a question. If this is not making sense at all yet, first off, don't stress over it because this is just the beginning. Today is not going to take too long for you because we're also doing our lead lesson during math today. Equivalent representations for 2/10. So you're going to build 2/10 two different ways. When you're doing that, think about building it with units and also building it with strips. And so take your time through this, but don't stress over it. I do have a question for you to send me a comment for again today, and I want you to answer this question. My question is, what do you think would be the coolest job to have when you're all grown up? So let me know that. And I hope you have, because we don't have school tomorrow, I hope you have a wonderful weekend, and I will talk to you soon. Bye, guys.